Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Kalireo Itaga, a member of Rethinking Economics. Welcome to anyone to Lack of Diversity. I will be hosting today's session, which belongs to Diversified, Decolonized, Democratized Economic stream of the festival. Maria is handling all the tech stream of the festival today, so pop here a question in the chat if you need help with Zoom. This is a panel discussion talking about how economics are being taught and the way they are reflected in the curriculum and how this leads to skewed policies and models. So we begin with Dr. Milonakis, Dr. Dimitris Milonakis from University of Crete will present the social, economic, political, and intellectual forces that saved the discipline in the first place. Then
is this visible?
Yeah. It's
okay,
fine.
Can I start?
Yes, but I would like first to present all the...
Okay.
Okay. Then we will go with Dr. Maria Floro from the American University of Washington. And she will speak about the striking absence of anyone but white middle-aged men from economics curriculum. Then we will continue with Dr. Nicola Scott, a member of Rethinking Economics, and she will discuss on how students experience this phenomenon of lack of diversity in economics. And finally, we will close with Dr. Keston from the University of West England in Bristol, and he will describe the effort to design modules in a different way, and afterwards we will pose your questions to the speakers. So wherever you are ready, Dr. Milonakis, you can begin.
Okay. Is this visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thanks very much. First of all, I would like to thank the team of Rethinking Economics, Maria and Kaliroy and Cameron and Tri and all the rest of you for inviting me and for the wonderful job that you are doing in our common effort to redirect economics. Now, this is the subject of my talk. And my presentation is based on a paper of mine which appeared in the Cambridge Journal of Economics in 2017. The fortification of economics refers to the process of creating barriers and walls, first towards the other social sciences and second towards alternative approaches to economic science, which is our main topic here. The chief characteristic of this process is the homogenization of economic science through its mathematization and formalization. Now, this is a multifaceted process involving intellectual, social, economic, political, and ideological factors. Here we will focus mostly on the latter two factors. There are two basic features lying behind the sickness of modern economics. One is methodological individualism, and the other is formalism, which is probably the most important feature since World War II. By formally, we don't mean just the process of mathematization, but mostly the emphasis of the techniques used rather than the explanation of economic phenomena, what Mark Blaug has called the triumph of form over substance. Now, recent scholarship has shed light on the intellectual factors involved, and these are a few of the authors involved in the literature. There are two basic lines of argument in the literature. One by Philip Mirovsky, who argues that it's the physics envy that lies behind the mathematization and formalization, and this refers to the attempt by economists to imitate the natural sciences, particularly the Newtonian mechanics of the 19th century. Another line of argument is by Tony Lawson, what he calls the enormous, often uncritical awe of mathematics in Western culture. So pronounced is this tendency of the awe of mathematics, according to Lawson, that has led him to describe it as a form of ideology. At the same time, Lawson denies any role of values and ideology in the process of formalizing economics and in what follows I shall try to show that this is wrong. Most of these accounts, although shedding important light to one of the intellectual factors involved, leave some important questions unanswered. First, they fail to account for the fact that economic science, for the most part of its history, certainly until World War II, was mostly a non-mathematical discursive science. Second, they also fail to explain the timing of the formalist revolution in the 50s. There are two basic problems in their accounts. First, they focus exclusively on intellectual factors, and second, on the development of mathematical economics, pure and simple. The result is that their account represents a sort of weak history where the axiomatization of economic science is presented as the predetermined result of the processes set in motion by the aforementioned factors, the O of mathematics or physics envy. Now, if we open up the picture, then we get a different picture. In the classical period, we can see that there is a systematic failure of mathematically oriented economists to make any substantial inroads into the dominant thinking of the day. So what explains the resistance to attempts to mathematize economics during most of the 19th century? In my paper, I have a host of factors. I cannot go into all of them. I'll just stick to this one, which is the focus of attention of all classicals was the capitalist economy treated as a dynamic system and conceived in its wider social and historical context. Hence, social relations and historical processes featured prominently in their analysis. But both of them, social relations and historical processes, are notoriously difficult to analyze mathematically. So this is probably the most important hurdle in the way of the mathematization of economic science in the 19th century. Now, in the latter part of the 19th century, something changed dramatically. This had to do with the marginalist revolution. Their aim was to transform economic science away from holistic, collectivist, and deductive modes of analysis towards more abstract and individualistic ones. So what is different with the marginalists? First, for the first time, the transformation of economics into a mathematical science on a par with natural sciences becomes a programmatic proclamation. Hence, Walras proclaims, quote, "The pure theory of economics is a science that resembles the physico-mathematical sciences in every respect." According to its practitioners, turning economics into a physical science involves the strict separation of positive from normative economics and the attempt to construct a value-free economics. Question: does the use of mathematical reasoning make economics value-free? The answer is simple and clear: no. To show the role of values, one has to go beyond the use of mathematics to the basic underlying principles of neoclassical economics. First, then, is methodological individualism, which is also a foundational principle of the philosophy of liberalism. Is this an accident? One of the organizing concepts of neoclassical economics, perfect competition, is also close to the liberal ideal of laissez-faire capitalism. Is this an accident? Although neoclassical theory purports to be positive with no normative content, it does use Benthamite utilitarianism as its underlying philosophical principle. But choosing one specific philosophical principle at the expense of all others is hardly a positive stance. Similarly, with a conception of man which privileges self-interest at the expense of other human traits. But economic models that purport to avoid values while at the same time privileging certain behavioral traits such as self-interest can never hope to be value-free. This move towards homo economicus is essential for the construction of a more abstract type of reasoning, lending itself more readily to mathematical analysis by formulating individual action in quantitative mathematical terms. Hence, there is a direct connection between the value-laden concept of homo economicus and Benthamite utilitarianism and the use of mathematical reasoning. There is no question then that the marginalist revolution laid the foundations of mathematization of economic science. There is also no question that the basic principles and concepts lying behind the mathematical jargon of neoclassical economics, are value-laden. The question now is, why was the full potential of mathematization only realized after some 80 years later in the 1950s? There is a host of factors. One is that developments in the real economy in the form of large corporations, trade unions, labor law, etc., were moving in the opposite direction. The same applies to political and ideological changes. In the early 20th century, we had the rise of the socialist countries. This was associated with a discrete change in the ideological climate from the age of individualism, as it is called, of the 19th century, to the age of collectivism of the early 20th century. In the 20s, there was a sense of defeat evident in the writings of most liberal writers. I have three quotes here. Hayek, for example, says that there are, in 1933, that there are few people today who are not socialists. In the 30s, the socioeconomic developments were also moving in a direction counter to neoclassical economics. We had the 29 crash and the Great Depression of the 30s, which discredited the whole neoclassical edifice. Also, the Soviet Union was experiencing exceptional rates of growth throughout the 30s, which, in the eyes of the contemporaries, even in the Western world, was showing that central planning may be more efficient than the free price system. We had Roosevelt's New Deal with government intervention, etc., etc. Now, the intellectual developments of the 30s, according to Weidrop, at the end of the 20s, beginning of the 30s, the times were still hostile to mathematical economics. Now, this was to change soon, because somewhere else in Europe, in Vienna, some mathematicians were rediscovering Walras's general equilibrium theory, reinvigorating in this way the mathematization of the dismal science project. Before that, in the early 20th century, Newtonian physics, on which the marginalist revolution was based, was in deep crisis, mostly because of the emergence of Einstein's relativity theory and the appearance of quantum mechanics. Also, in 1918, Hilbert's program in mathematics was started, which was an attempt to reconstruct the whole mathematics on an axiomatic basis. In the 40s, in line with these developments, there were two important monographs that appeared in economics. The first was von Neumann and Morgenstern, Theory of Games and Economic Behavior, and the other was Paul Samuelson's Foundation of Economic Analysis, both of which became cornerstones of the upcoming, mostly Paul Samuelson's, of the upcoming formalist revolution. Now, the formalist revolution as such took off in the 50s. The pinnacle was Arrow and Debre's proof of the existence, but not uniqueness of stability of a general equilibrium. Now, this was achieved at the expense of realism. Arrow and Debre's proof had more to do with mathematical logic than with economic reasoning. And here is Debre expressing this trend. Quote, the theory of value has a mathematical form that is completely separate from its economic content. So the formalist revolution reached its peak, as had the total detachment of theory from any claims to realism or real-world relevance. Now, the formalist revolution coincided with the Cold War and McCarthyism. The political atmosphere after the Second World War was changing, and following a new opponent was found in the face of former US war allies, the Soviet Union. Cold War was mostly fought, as is well known, at the political and ideological level. Our question is this: was there any relationship between the two developments, that is the Cold War and the formalist revolution? The simple answer is yes. Cold War and McCarthyism played a significant role in the turn of events in economic science during the 50s. The question is, how did this happen? First, through direct personal purges and suppression of certain ideas, and second, indirectly, through the direction of state-related funding to specific kinds of research at the expense of others. Let's first talk about direct purges. The name of the game of US administrators was to counter communism and the collectivist ideology. The most obvious target was, of course, Marxism, because of its direct affinities with the communist ideology. Keynes's legacy, however, which was gaining more and more support even in the USA, was another target of McCarthyist attacks. Second, indirect ways of promoting specific kinds of research at the expense of others include governments and in particular defense-related agencies in the USA, which exerted a direct influence in the construction of specific theories. Thus, most of the funding of the Office of Naval Research went to mathematical economists such as Arrow and De Bruyn. The RAND Corporation, which was founded in 1945 by the United States Air Force, had as chief aim to continue the scientific developments of the war, but also to counter the nuclear and ideological threat of communism. What is of direct interest for our purposes is the fact that Kenneth Arrow's social choice and individual values, published in 1951, one of the cornerstones of the ongoing formalist revolution and of rational choice theory, which had an ideological, quote, had an ideological use since it provided an intellectual framework for opposing communism, arose out of his involvement with the RAND Corporation. Arrow showed the supremacy of Western democracy over its rivals using the objective tool of mathematics and rational choice theory. For Backhouse, quote, in such an environment, as Samuelson has admitted, it could be invaluable to present one's work as scientific, and the more technical, the better. In other words, the more ideological the use of economics became, the more the need to present it as scientific and objective. Concluding, the formalization and fortification of economics is not the inevitable result of some predetermined process of mathematization brought about either by the physics envy or maths O, although both played an important role. These approaches fail to account for the fact that for the most of its history, economics has been a narrative science. For an explanation of both the protracted non-mathematical periods in the development of economic theory and the eventual triumph of formalism, a contextual approach to economic theorizing is needed where developments in economic theory are put in their appropriate historical contexts. In this way, social, economic, and political developments and the spirit of the age, the zeitgeist, neatly supplement intellectual factors in offering a fuller and more rounded interpretation. And it was shown in the process that neither economics in general is a value-free science, nor the process of its mathematization and formalization, its fortification, in other words, as an ideologically and value-neutral exercise. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Milonakis. After hearing how economics lacks diversity of thought, we will now explore the lack of diversity in its people. So, Maria Floro, wherever you are ready, you can begin.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the organizers of the Rethinking Economics Festival for inviting me. I'm going to discuss now the diversity and inclusion issues in economics and why they matter. Trying to see how I could, oh, thank you. Yeah. So I'm going to talk from the lens of female Asian economists who have been in the United States for nearly 40 years now. And I'm part of a exciting network of economists called feminist economists, whose extensive body of work in the last few decades reveal many aspects of the economics profession and economics as a social science discipline that have not been acknowledged in the past decades. That it's male dominated, and that majority of influential theories and economic models are based on Western countries, primarily developed countries' experience, i.e., for example, the notion of complete markets, the perfect or costless information, and importantly also, the strong sense of individualism and homogeneity of rational agents. So my first point is that economics as a social science discipline is actually socially constructed. So if we think of this body of knowledge that Dimitris, for example, just talked about, how did these ideas came to be influential and dominate a profession that has a lot of influence on policy making? Well, it is created actually by a group of individuals. Think about it, predominantly men. Most of the people that Dimitris talked about that shape, for example, mainstream economics are men living in Western or industrializing or industrialized countries. And therefore, they reflect the way they have come to think about economic life, starting with Adam Smith and going on to the contemporary times. So the development of this body of knowledge is influenced by the interests and biases of its theories and dominant thinkers, whether from an ideological perspective, but I'm also going to argue from their perspective as men and reflecting on economic life. So this result, in my view, in explicit as well as implicit biases. There are male bias assumptions. Okay? They exclude a wide range of economic activities that are non-market, unpaid in the depiction of the economy. So when you talk about scarcity of resources and how you allocate them, they tend to focus on goods and services that are produced for the market by the market. It ignores goods and services produced by unpaid labor that take in place, for example, in the household and in communities. It excludes, I also argue, it excludes the experiences and interests as well as needs of certain groups: women, minorities, immigrants, vulnerable, insecure workers. I'm talking here of the mainstream, I'm not talking about the entirety of economics profession, but the mainstream or the dominant models. So these excluded activities, voice, and experiences are all swept under the assumptions of, in addition to what Dimitris has talked about, gender neutrality, agents facing same set of choices and opportunities, and so forth and so on. Next slide. So this lead, of course, to predicted outcomes, predictions, for example, of theories and models, development strategies, and economic policies that represent only the interests of certain groups, often at the expense of those excluded or made invisible in economic models and theories. This process of exclusion resonates now more than ever, as the global economy now faces challenging times, and particularly in the United States, where the issue of race and injustice and inequality has become prominent in recent months. So let me then explore why is this bias and exclusion created in economics persist? Why does it? How is it perpetuated? Let's look at the transmitters of economic knowledge, the faculty. I'm going to use some data from studies that have actually been done by economists themselves, member of the American Economics Association, who started exploring this issue in recent years. In the United States, female faculty in economics department as of 2017, full professors is about 13%, associate professors 23%, assistant professors about 24%. When we also look at race, we find that this is only 3 years ago, 2017, Blacks and Hispanics together occupy only 6.3% of all full-time tenured and tenure-track economics positions across all institutions in the United States. In PhD granting economics department, Black economists represent 1.6% of assistant professors, 1.5% of associate professors, and 1.3% of full professors. We continue to the next slide, please. Yeah. Now, who are the next generation of economists? Well, I'm sorry if my slide might not be too clear, but this is taken from an interesting study by Bayer and Rouse in 2016 when they looked at, who are the students of economics. There are 4 graphs here. The first 2 set of graphs refer to the degrees awarded to women and underrepresented minorities. This is in the United States. And the first panel A is the percentage of doctorate degrees awarded to women. There are 5 lines here. The lowest, the dark black line, is economics. You have other curves here or graphs to compare it. SS refers to social sciences. STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. H refers to humanities. That's the orange line. And the broken line is business. So you could see comparing economics to the other groups of disciplines, the economics has the lowest, and its persistence from 1995 to 2015. The same is true for bachelor's degree women in economics. You see that black solid line is with E representing economics to be the bottom curve. Now, what about minority students? We see a little bit more sort of fluctuation in terms of the percentage of doctorate degrees awarded to minority students, but you still see economics to have the lowest proportion compared to business, social science, STEM, and humanities. This is true not only for doctorate degrees awarded to minority students, but also to bachelor degrees awarded to minority students. Let's then go to the next slide, please. Now, in addition to admission to the economics department, as well as hiring and promotion in economics profession, there are also a recent American Economics Association Professional Climate Survey study, 2019, show that nearly half of women in the respondents to the survey reported unequal treatment, including sexual harassment and failure to take their work seriously. Nearly half of Black economists reported being discriminated against or treated unfairly in the profession based on their race, compared to, say, 4% of white survey respondents. Women from historically underrepresented racial and ethnic groups more often modify their activity, this is their way of coping, to avoid possible harassment, discrimination, or unfair or disrespectful treatment. And Asian women, Black women, as well as Latinas, report more often than white women that they have encountered discrimination in promotion and pay. So there's this intersection of gender and race that we observe in terms of the nature of bias discrimination. This persistence also continue Because if you have predominantly white men teaching a body of knowledge that are shaped by group of influential thinkers that are predominantly white, based in Western, living in developed countries, you will have lack of role models in the profession. That will deter women and minorities from further considering economics as a profession. We know, I've been teaching at the American University for more than 30 years, that students are inspired by role models. They are less subject to stereotype threats in the presence of a stereotype-defying economics professor. My own experience as a feminist economist, development economist, is shaped by the role model of female economists before me who have challenged the stereotype notion, who have challenged assumptions of economics, and who have brought some creativity and innovative ideas in economic thinking from a gendered lens. So research suggests, going back to studies and evidence, research suggests that implicit bias affects interactions at all stages of the academic pipeline, informal decisions such as promotion and admission, and in routine interactions such as advising students on courses, to taking or responding to questions and ideas from colleagues. So this is what we're talking about, the climate that enables or not enable diversity and pluralism in economic thinking. Okay? Unfortunately, students also take on this unconscious bias. And there's an interesting study that shows actually students rate instructors of online classes significantly higher when the instructors use a male identity than when they use a female identity, regardless of the instructor's actual gender. So that's the next slide, please. So I would argue that diversity matters in economics. All of us have some form of prejudice and bias. They exist in our thoughts and actions, consciously or unconsciously. They have become normal and mainstream in habits, and we do them whether we perform them consciously or unconsciously. But the only way to break these habits, this prejudice and bias, is to allow, for example, our profession, where we work, where we express our ideas and articulate our views, to be diverse. But breaking these habits require more than good intentions. Next slide, please. So what does diversity brings to economics? Well, diverse experiences and perspectives bring different lenses to viewing the same phenomenon or issue. I've been trained as an undergraduate, as a master's student, as well as a doctoral student in predominantly mainstream economics. But when I view them, when I start reading articles and literature and work of people that view it from a different lens, say from a gender lens, or from the lens of an African American or a Black woman or a minority, you see the same phenomena or issue from a different perspective. And you realize that you have actually been thinking about economics with blinders. And therefore, I view that diversity enhances our understanding of the problem at hand. They produce more depth and lead to creative, comprehensive, as opposed to piecemeal type and more effective solutions to economic problems, to development problems. However, diversity brings challenges. It leads to questioning assumptions. And so we have to be comfortable with criticism, constructive criticism. It tests one's arguments and process of reasoning. Just when we feel comfortable about our idea and how logical and great our ideas are, someone can ask a very valid and fair question, and it says, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that point of view. So it really results and yields to broad-mindedness and open-mindedness, which in my view is the core of a vibrant body of knowledge and social science discipline. It's the only way we could push the frontiers of economics forward, not backward, not regressively, is to be broad-minded and to be able to listen to various perspectives. Now, for diversity to flourish, we have to address, painful as it may be, the blinders and barriers, both subtle and not so subtle, that block women and underrepresented minorities' participation and vote. It's very important that we consciously address the bias that has been in place for decades, not only in the body of knowledge that we are transmitting to students or that we are writing on, but also in the way we interact with our colleagues and with our students. Diversity broadens, we need to broaden also the definition of what economics is about. This is one of the fundamental lessons I learned as being part of the feminist economics network. It's beyond what we learn at the first definition of economics. You know, when you take introductory economics, optimization of allocation of scarce resources to satisfy unlimited wants. The domain of economic inquiry must include all issues concerning the provisioning of human life, whether done through the market, public sector, communities, and households. But for the most part, what has been taught in economics has been focused on the market, through the market, provided by the market. In order for diversity to flourish, we have to promote the use of diverse set of analytical tools and techniques to examine economic problems and issues. The point raised by Dimitris is important to understand that it's not just the form, but also the substance. But the way we examine the substance or content of the issue at hand does not necessarily mean using statistic or quantitative sophisticated econometric tools. They are useful for great data sets and numbers and figures, but we also have to recognize that there are many issues at hand that challenge the provisioning of human life that are not easily boxed into data or statistics. In some cases, they've never been collected. They are statistically invisible. And therefore, it's important to include qualitative mixed methods alongside quantitative methods. Methodologies, in my view, help shape the body of economic knowledge, for they can manifest authority and legitimacy. So if it's qualitative, it's soft, it's weak. Whereas if it's mega data with sophisticated econometric tools, structure of equational model, wow, this is powerful. But what do they mean? And what biases do they embody? Those are the questions we need to ask. Okay, so I'd like to end my talk with some ideas on how to promote diversity, sort of on a more optimistic note. Role models and mentors are so important. I'm a product of one. I wouldn't be here talking to you with these ideas if I have not learned from the models and mentors that I've had through the decades. Many of them I am gratefully thankful for. The development of programs and networks that promote diversity and pluralism. I belong, for example, to the International Association for Feminist Economics, or IAFE. I am part of the program of gender analysis in economics, or PGAE, at American University. It's a unique graduate program within the economics department that promotes the analysis of economic issues from a gendered lens. International Development Economics Associates, IDEAS, has allowed the pluralism and heterodox ideas to permeate, to flourish And the same thing, for example, the development alternatives with women for a new dawn era that allow women from the developing countries to speak out, to express their experiences and interests. I also want to mention some recent initiatives. Okay? Course syllabus is so important, right? Now, IAFE has come up with this course syllabus catalog that includes syllabi for undergraduate and graduate economics courses on gender, feminist investigation, gender and development. Okay. There's the Work and Family Researchers Network, WFRN, that develops innovative pedagogies and curricula to help students in multiple disciplines, including economics, to learn about work-family concerns. I think now we understand this work-life balance in the midst of the COVID, when everybody has to do teleworking. And women tend to be at a disadvantage because they have to telework while they're taking care of young kids. Diversity in Economic Quality is an initiative by Amanda Bayer from the American Economics Association Committee on the Status of Minority Groups in the Economic Profession. They have outlined ways to incorporate heterodox theories of economics into curriculum, including feminist theory, queer theory, post-colonial theory, and recommends best practices to instructors. And then there's the Claudia Golden's initiative called Undergraduate Women in Economics Challenge, which provide guidance and significant funds to the economic department to explore and implement interventions. So I think that we have a big challenge and task at hand in breaking this lack of diversity in economics. And I look forward to your questions and ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. So we will now hear from Nicola, which will present some student experiences on the lack of diversity. And she has asked me to reiterate that you can post anonymously in the Q&A if you don't want something to appear by your name. So feel free, and she will have some interactive slides. Please respond to them. You can go ahead, Nicola.
Thank you. And yeah, thanks again to all the organisers. Yeah, it's really privileged to be a part of this. So thank you for organising this. Firstly, I'd just like to give you a welcome. So I want to welcome people of African, Black, Asian, Arab and European descent, those who identify as Hispanic, Latinx and people of mixed, multiple descents. I want to welcome all languages spoken. And I want to welcome people of all genders, people with disabilities, visible or invisible, all sexualities, and people with different faiths, religions, faith practices and private practices not belonging to a tradition, as well as atheists. Okay. So just something to think about. How would my welcome have made you feel if you heard it when studying? So I'll just run through what I'm going to talk about today. So the question I'm asking in this presentation is, what have students experienced about the lack of diversity in economics? And this will be based primarily on evidence from peer-to-peer student interviews, with some focus group research with high school students in London as well. I'll just run through what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to mention that Rethinking Economics, along with Economy, our sister charity, we've been working on a book, so I'll provide a brief history about our book, which addresses diversity or the lack of in economics. I'm going to look at the barriers to choosing to study economics, which students have experienced, barriers and support they received at university, and student experiences of the lack of diversity among academics and within the curriculum, just as Maria has been mentioning. And finally, I'll finish on a positive with some recommendations. Okay. So firstly, if you can just put, I think in the Q&A bit, what do you think this map represents? Okay. I'm just going to give you about 10 seconds to do that. So what do you think this map represents? Okay.
Nicola, I don't think we can see your slide.
Oh, you can't see it? Oh, no. Oh, sorry. I did not press share, sorry about that. the times that I'm Zoom, I'm not pressed share. Okay, and I'll just make sure I'm there.
Are you sharing your screen?
No, I'm just trying to not reveal the answer to what I've just answered people. I'll ask people, so I'll just delete it. Okay. Wait me a minute. Okay, right. Okay, so is that showing now? Great, sorry about that. Okay, so if you can answer the question, what does this map represent, please? Just going to give you a few seconds to do that. Okay, is anyone getting some questions in? Any answers in? Okay, so if you don't know already, that map represents Nobel Prize winners in economics between the years 1969 to 2014, based on their countries. Which, yeah, you can see just where people come from who have been given these prestigious awards in economics. So this was kind of like the foundation of why we wanted to look at, well, what's going on with this lack of diversity? Why does this lack of diversity exist? And how do students experience this lack of diversity that Maria so well communicated earlier? Okay. So in relation to that, I'm just going to quickly go through the brief history of our book as to why, as long as that map, the information on there, why we chose to look at the lack of diversity in economics. So as Maria's mentioned, there's lots of information, particularly about the lack of women in economics, and particularly from the US, there's lots of information about minority women, how they're not represented in economics departments and among students. So there's lots of information out there. This started with Alice Wu, who also looked at prejudice and bias amongst the Economics Job Forum. So I'll include all these references in a document which I can send to people if you want that as well. So when we look at what we wanted to focus on, okay, so there's no women or few women. There's hardly any ethnic minorities in certain countries involved in economics. But then we realised, well, we wanted to look at this through an intersectional lens. Okay, so that means that, and I'll put this diagram on board just to help you. Being a woman is not the only factor that influences your experience in economics. And this diagram can help to show that as well. So what we wanted to look at, we wanted to look at the interplay between different aspects of people's identities, such as if you're a woman of colour, or if you're a working class white woman, for example, or a man who is black and from a privileged position. Yeah, your life will have different experiences based on your identities. Okay, so we wanted to provide that through our research. Okay, so we just didn't want to focus on particularly on women or only people who were identified as people of colour. Okay, so if you can and if you want to, could you think about how the categories on the diagram, which you identify with, how they affected what you have experienced in your life? Okay. I just want to see which identities have it impacted on your life as well. So by this I mean, do you feel like coming from a certain country has affected how you've experienced economics? or if you're from a certain social class or a certain ethnicity, if you're from a particular gender. Okay. Mainly, this is just to get you to think about these ideas so that we can then lead on to why students felt the things they did when it comes to their interview data. Okay. So, along with looking at it from an intersectional lens, we believed that it wasn't just a case about diversifying economics. As I got hold of some of the research, as Maria has gone through, it became clear that we wanted to not just diversify economics, but there was a real need to decolonize it and democratize it, because we felt that the 3Ds, diversifying, decolonizing, democratizing economics, were really interlinked. You couldn't really have one without having each of the other two. Okay? And we also felt that just by having, say, like certain targets of numbers, like certain numbers of women of color in departments studying or teaching economics, sometimes that can have a tokenistic impact. Like so we felt like by decolonizing, democratizing economics, then you can change things like what is the content of economics education, how is it taught, who do we encourage to enter into the world of economics. So to do this and to really evidence all these, the 3 previous points, we felt primarily for our book, we wanted to chart students' journeys in it, as well as professionals. But today I'm going to just look at students' journeys in economics. So that starts from high school through to university. And we chose to do this by having these focus groups with high school students, as well as having peer-to-peer interviews conducted. Now that was done mostly by students in economics, particularly students who were part of the Rethinking Economics Network. And this is where these students came from. So it was a very international sort of response that we received. So first of all, I just want to go through some of the pre-university student views that people had in economics. So these were particularly from high school students. And I just want to read out a quote, which I think kind of sums up a lot of the views expressed from within high schools. This is a quote from Cara, and she's aged between 13 and 14. I've used pseudonyms, so no real names have been used in my presentation. Okay. So at high school, she said, when I think of economics and inequality, I think that the way economics has been portrayed, the types of people that are pushed to do economics, that some people think, oh, that's not for me, because I'm not the same as the people that the society has portrayed them to be. So I can't do it because I look like this or I'm like that. I think it's sad that people are missing out on things that they could love and that they could be good at. And when I heard this, I just felt really sad to think that there's a student who, when she heard about what economics was about, she then said she would like to study it, but doesn't have the opportunity to study it in her school. And this is because some of the research we've found that certainly in the UK, there's less exposure to economics in non-fee paying schools. Okay, so immediately we're looking at social class factors here as to who can and can't access economics. Another barrier we found amongst focus group research, and some students actually as well, university students, but there is this belief in economics being just about money and business and profits. So again, this cuts out people who maybe want to work in the public sector or want to work on environmental issues, which some of the focus group students didn't realise was part of economics as well. Another deterrent we found was maths. People thinking it's just about pie charts and statistics, and as Maria's mentioned, maybe we could have a different sort of mixed methods approach to economics. It would help a lot of different students who maybe get put off by maths. And certainly amongst the focus group research, there was this idea that economics is mostly for white men in suits. And just to show you this is some of the drawings that some of the students came up with in the high schools. Now the problem here is that these images are formed well before they have the options of studying at university, okay? So just make a note of that. Okay. So just don't have to answer this actually, just think about how did you find out about economics as a subject and what made you want to study it? Try and link that to aspects of your identity, link to that intersection diagram which I showed previously. Okay. Okay. Now, some of the other barriers to choosing to study economics were things like the gender of somebody, being a woman. Some women felt that the idea of just studying primarily with men in classrooms could be a barrier to them, especially if they came from a single-sex school, like an all-female school. Some women said that they were questioned when entering master's degrees in economics. They were questioned as to what they're going to do with their life, when they're going to get married, things like that. Those sort of gendered questions that men would not receive. Okay. Now, a student also mentioned some racial and social barriers as well. So I want to read that out because I think it's quite an important one to express. Okay. So this was from Gina. Now she studies at a very good university in the UK. And she said that studying economics at university, in the school she was at before university, she felt that there were some racial and social barriers she experienced. So she said, my school had middle-class white girls, and I can tell you they were definitely favoured by far. Any of the people that I had listed here having negative experiences, me, my friend, or other students that weren't necessarily viewed favourably by the teachers, they were all black. We were all black. The black girls, the Muslim girls, they weren't favoured. I don't have the statistics, but I can tell you we were probably predicted the lower grades in the school. Okay. Now this is her real experience of what she has experienced. Okay. Now others felt like, in response to some of the barriers, they showed some resilience. So Erica, a Japanese American student, said, I chose economics because it was not what I was supposed to do, or like it was not something I was supposed to understand. I think I was really tired in high school of being in those political conversations like leader competitions. And there'd be this sort of condescending, privileged white boy that would be like, well, you're wrong. And I'm like, I didn't want to be talked to in that way. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm just going to level up. Okay. So imagine feeling left out or not good enough because of your gender, race, or social class, or any other identity. So moving on to university, there were some women in particular that said that they had gender imposter syndrome. So this prevented them from asking questions in class. They felt like they shouldn't be there because they're women, because they're in the minority. And some women also felt that men dominated discussions in classes and in lectures. Okay. Some people felt there were some racial and ethnic barriers. There was stereotyping of where they were from. One student from Brazil said that all the lecturers in their university, when they went to a European university, or some lecturers there in their department, said that all Latin American researchers are just communists, aren't they? Because that's the history of Latin America, left-wing politics. And some people then internalize these sort of stereotypes, or they internalize these racial critiques that some people would have of them. So when they saw just mainly white middle class and men teaching them, they began to believe that, well, okay, maybe economics isn't for me. I'm not good enough for that, okay? However, there were other students that talk of social support, particularly from people that identify or had similar identities to themselves. Okay. However, there were others who had social barriers involving whilst they were at university. So this would include things like not having money to pay for the tuition fees, having to think about that, and yeah, just not feeling that other students they were studying with had similar barriers to them. Okay. Now, in positive terms, students spoke of students in economics from different backgrounds, bringing different perspectives. So this seems quite an obvious one, but unfortunately students felt that this was not happening in their degrees. Okay. They didn't hear from anyone who was poor. They didn't come across them either in the classroom or in the teaching materials used. It just wasn't like people were not presented as real people in their learning materials. There'll be sort of stereotypes of who can be involved in economics. So, for example, in case studies, there'd be somebody like who would start a business and do from scratch, and then they'd have to look at the technical information related to economics using that case study. However, one student from North America stated just didn't represent their life at all. They came from a very poor background, and they would not have the money in the first place to invest in something, and that's what they said. And they felt really kind of ignored, and their experiences felt ignored in their degree. So in response to this, there was some support though that students felt they did receive at university. And I think, as Maria's mentioned, there's support from people with similar identities, like women, role models. There were some students that felt that just by having different people with different identities there was so useful to them. It made them feel like, well, they're doing it and they're a professor, or they're a lecturer, then I can too. And that it doesn't just link to gender, but there are other people, like men as well, from minority men as well, who said that. Okay. And the other thing that did come through this though was people, certainly amongst women, there was a lot of resilience that they did have, and they yielded to get through some of the barriers that they faced. So one in particular said, that I'm going to become a professor so that I can then change economics from within, so that students can see me as somebody different, with different views, different approaches to economics that maybe other people do not have. The other thing that was really important was peer support. So student support, students like themselves, who with similar identities, that was really important to students. Now, key thing that did come up was the student experiences of the lack of diversity among academics and within the curriculum. So I've mentioned before, there was a dominance of white men. There was, as Maria has also mentioned again, gender issues being at the periphery of their economics education, especially things like care work, unpaid work. And there was a lack of representation of race, particularly in the curriculum, and how race can affect economics. So, and one student, Gina, said, there was nothing about the experiences of a Black person. Like me as a Black person, I would experience economics differently to other people. That was just not on the curriculum. Now, one
Nicola, I'm sorry, but we have run terribly out of time.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I'm doing. What was that?
I'm really sorry. We'll try to get the presentations up on the website.
Yeah, sure.
The rest of it,
Yeah.
We have to move on to Keston now.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much for your presentation, but unfortunately we have to move on without finishing our presentation. So we have Keston Perry, who focuses on the promotion of pluralism. And whenever you are ready, you can begin.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, wherever you are. Well, I am in London, so it's afternoon here. And today I'm going to speak a little bit about, and thank you very much for, my apologies, I've lost my manners. Thank you very much to Rethinking Economics, to everyone who has helped organize this. This is absolutely fantastic to be able to share some thoughts about the issue and question of race in economics. This is how I'm titling my particular presentation this afternoon. And I think everyone has really helped lay out and outline a lot of very interesting and helps preface a lot of what I'm going to talk about this afternoon. So it is indeed a very good pleasure to be with everyone. And one second, I'm just trying to find, right, here we go. So to share about, I guess, a bit about my background. So I come to economics from a very different journey than most economists. I do not have an undergraduate degree in economics. I do not have a postgraduate degree in economics. However, my PhD thesis addressed the issue of institutional economics and development economics, and looked at how the barriers, or rather the gaps in thinking around political economy of development, and how those gaps frame economic phenomena and economic outcomes in a particular way that prevents us best understanding the influence of things like social forces, power relations in society, and how those things relate to policy outcomes and economic outcomes. So my undergraduate experience was in humanities, and I did my postgraduate studies in business. So economics is I come from it from a very different perspective, and thus that has influenced how I have engaged in this particular space and how I've engaged in understanding phenomena from the perspective of social dynamics and institutions in society. So that's to help sort of preface where I'm coming from. And today I'm going to talk about the race question in economics after George Floyd and the COVID-19 pandemic. And what are some of the questions or the issues that these two particular events have raised? But beyond those particular events, what are some of the issues that we can address in the curriculum, economics curriculum, and how we might think about some of those particular ideas. So I'm going to share some ideas around how the economics curriculum, so this is a term that has been used a lot, how we decolonize the curriculum, and what to me is a very significant responsibility and undertaking for not only economists, but citizens, for people who engage in their everyday lives. They have to engage on issues of employment or on policy issues and so on. And economics has become the sort of, as a previous speaker has said, it has become the main go-to as a discipline for discussing a range of policy ideas, sometimes which it does not have business addressing, right? So let's talk about how we can discuss race in the question on the field of economics. so I will share a few provocations on how we might think about reforming the curriculum. And I'm going to draw upon a number of economists and social scientists whom I think offer some approaches and some thinking behind, first, why economics is the way it is. And I think it is both within the mainstream neoclassical tradition and in some respect heterodox economics that is guilty of not addressing the question of race and racialized inequalities and racialized people and their experiences within society. It is, however, within the second paradigm, so heterodox economics, that I think we can seek to locate many of these experiences, and we can seek to locate methods and perhaps ways of approaching and thinking about race and racialized inequality in society, and seek to, possibly integrate questions about racial inequality and marginalization and disadvantage. To do this, I think we have to go back a little to understand how British society, so this is where I am based, and this is where I lecture as an economics lecturer at the University of the West of England. And this is where I think we can understand, as one of the major or one of the richest economies in the world, how questions of economic and social questions are framed. And we can draw upon some contemporary examples or episodes to think about how economics has framed those issues, or how it has not considered some of those issues. So we can think about the Windrush scandal, where a number of Black and ethnic minority people have been marginalized in the society of their birth, right? And many of whom they would have come either as members of the colonial empire, they would have been citizens of Great Britain, and so they would have migrated to the United Kingdom at that time in order to make a contribution after the war in a number of areas in the economy. We can also think about, we just had the recent immigration bill that was passed by Parliament. And we can think about the questions of skilled labor, the question of unskilled labor, and how politicians and political institutions have framed the question of immigration of high-skilled labor, or how unskilled labor is what they're not going after. They're going after people with whom they think possess a certain amount of human capital in order to build up after the question of Brexit has been finalized. And we can also think about the Grenfell Tower disaster, which happened a few years ago. And we can think about the question of housing. This brings to the fore the issue of housing and how housing provision and social housing is addressed in a society such as Britain, and in a borough, in the richest borough in the United Kingdom, Kensington, where a number 72 people, I believe it is, died as a result of neglect, and as a result of neglect from a policy point of view, neglect from a class point of view, and neglect from the rest of society, many of whom within the tower were immigrants themselves. So we can discuss these particular episodes, and at their core, there are important economic questions, and the question of economic citizenship in terms of who in Britain is deemed of value, quote unquote, to the system, and who is not. So it has to do with who has power in the society to shape the kinds of structures and economic structures that are built up over many, many years, many decades and centuries even, if we consider the role of Britain in the wider imperial sphere, and as Britain as an empire around its relationship with the Caribbean and the West Indies, as well as Africa. The fact that, so we can think about this very recent episode as well, and where police, the Met Police decided to restrain a Black man, his name is Marcus Coutin, by placing one of the Met officers placed his knee on the neck of Marcus even after the incident of George Floyd in the United States. The Met Police, regardless of all the Black Lives Matters protests, events, and so on, they decided to imitate that particular act, right? And this happened in North London just a few weeks ago after George Floyd's murder, which happened earlier this year. So it comes back to the question of who has power in society to frame the ideas that are important, to frame the policies that address particular types of inequalities, and to frame the portrayals of different people via the media and via different outlets towards the rest of society, and the kinds of discussions that we see arise as a result of that. This particular act I want to talk about, the last one, shows us how in our society people endowed with responsibility and authority through the economic and political forces of the state are able to engage citizens and determine how they are treated, portrayed, and are deemed worthy of social and economic provisioning. I want to suggest that economics is both an intellectual framework and a social phenomena. And it frames questions, social questions, it frames ethical questions, it frames moral questions in a particular kind of way. And we would have heard from earlier on the marginalist revolution and that the influence that has had over the last 60 or so years, right? So economic questions are also framed in the media, and these particular incidents are seen, and whether they're taken seriously by the public or not also is determined by the economic forces that prop up or that support the media establishment. These particular incidents of injustice are not separate and apart from who has power to frame both economic thought and academic learning and academic inquiry. We all circulate and coexist in these spaces and engage with these particular realities, and above all, have views about them. The limits and boundaries of what constitutes the economy and what constitutes economics is also framed through particular political struggles. How we learn about issues both within academia and outside of academia, and learn to become citizens, but especially how we learn about these particular ideas through economic frameworks, help us to determine how we react to these particular events. The Windrush scandal, the George Floyd event, as well as the Grenfell Tower event. Disaster. How power is organized and how actually it is performed in our society also frames individual and collective conceptions of justice and collective outcomes across a number of different people. These particular ideas, portrayals, reasonings, and social structures that underpin them produce the tools of economic control and thus shape what we render relevant to economics teaching and analysis. I want to connect the relevance of studying racial and ethnic disparities to ongoing social and material events and concerns. So writer Gary Young, who's also a sociology professor at the University of Manchester, recently suggested that the issue of race has often been treated as an exogenous concern, given that racialized people in the British Empire were often lodged in areas of the Caribbean and elsewhere, and were treated as unfree labor. And thus, British imperialists did not really have to consider, or they did not believe they have to consider race and how racialized inequalities might have emerged. An example would be early 19th century and after the World War I in the West Indies. Empire had become more and more expensive to run and manage. And Eric Williams in Capitalism and Slavery talks about this. The discourse about race and development that emerged in Britain at the time of abolition of slavery in the mid 19th century around how to manage these particular crises and social uprisings in the West Indies in the, this was also in the early 20th century, but were never seen as relevant or important to change in particular social and political structures in British society. This was despite the fact that Black people had been in Britain long before the Windrush in the 1940s and 50s. It is why, to some degree, Britain has time and again been able to avoid the issue of major reforms with respect to addressing the disparities in income, wealth, social institutions, and so on with respect to racialized people in Britain. And British political institutions have been able, actually, and this is in a book by, a recent book on the British Empire. I'll find the actual reference and let you know. It has been able to legislate ways of racializing people and in the process institutionalizing disparities that are faced today by Black and ethnic minority groups. Since Brexit in 2016, hello?
We lost you there for a minute.
We lost, okay.
And if you could please wrap up because we're running out of time and would like to take
Okay, sure. At what point did you lose me so I can make the connection?
just the few last words that you just froze for a minute.
Okay, I see. So we can talk about as well, and I'm going to wrap up soon, how the issue around Brexit and working class communities have been portrayed as predominantly white and disadvantaged within the context of the European Union. And Robbie Shilliam shows this in his book, Race and the Undeserving Poor. In the United Kingdom today, the obvious signs of why we need to understand race within the sphere of economic analysis and teaching have come to the fore in light of so many recent events. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic underscores the relationship between racialized disparities and inequality. We know now that Black and ethnic minorities are 4 times more likely to die of the coronavirus than white people. This is not a happenstance and it's not an accident based on a totally unexpected external shock. The Office of National Statistics and Public Health England have thus recognized significant disadvantage in housing, employment, income, and socioeconomic disparities that have contributed to disproportionately more deaths among Black and minority ethnic people. However, these inequalities are papered into the system and they are only now revealing themselves. We know, for instance, that a large share of the people who are on the frontline jobs during this pandemic have been Black and ethnic minorities. And a very interesting statistic from the Office of National Statistics shows us that the unemployment rate among ethnic minorities stand now at 27.2%, and interestingly has fallen from a year ago, which was at 28.7%. And this tells us the number of Black and ethnic minority people who are actually continuing to hold up the economy. We have also seen that the police contact with Black and ethnic minorities that lead to significantly higher levels of incarceration of Black and ethnic minority people. Police contact leads to a higher proportion of deaths among Black and ethnic minorities. We also know that between March and May, that 20,000 stop and search exercises were carried out against Black men, which is equivalent to about 30% of all Black men living in the capital city of London. 80% of these led to no further action by the police. So this is my final bit here. The challenge of studying race and the economy is one that is structured in a long history of British Empire and how that imperial structures live on today. But it has also shone a long shadow on the academy and academic institutions. The tools of analysis for studying race have hitherto been developed within sociology, development studies, Black studies, post-colonial and decolonial studies. I therefore have the sense that studying race, inequalities associated with racialized people and identities do not find a home in mainstream neoclassical economics. And this is because of the ideas within the marginal productivity theorem, and because of the ideas associated with the within neoclassical economics that suggest markets are system clearing institutions. The color blindness and whitewashing of history and social structures in this manner suggests that racism cannot exist, or racial marginalization are not relevant to understanding how the economy works. The current debates that have emerged in economics, or maybe have not emerged as sufficiently as they should, have to some extent been addressed in earlier development economic approaches like theories of dependency, especially the plantation economy school, and more recently in stratification economics. These ideas and approaches still remain marginal to the discipline of economics as a whole, but they have sought to carve out a space by engaging, at least in the latter case, with a number of mainstream economics journals and outlets. In my view, it is dependency theory, the plantation economy school, sociological studies, Black studies, Caribbean studies that offer the promise for understanding and reviving economic thought with respect to racialized minorities and with respect to economics teaching and curriculum, and in terms of how we understand the relationship between wealth, labor markets, income distribution, education, housing, and so on. Without understanding how economic and social structures continue to perpetuate problems that are inherent within economics tradition and economic methods, ideas, and policies which disregard them or perpetuate how we think about these matters, we cannot actually come to a better understanding of these disparities. Hopefully this conversation and many more like this would help us to do better around understanding inequalities and how we can advance a more just society. Thank you.
Thank you, Keston. So thank you, everyone. We really do not have time for questions. I invite you to join our Facebook group to continue these discussions. You can find it on the Rethinking Economics page. And we've got a plenary on what decolonizing economics means right after this. And there's a very interesting session this afternoon with Titi Bhattacharya on non-white care workers who are bearing the burden of COVID. I think it would be a very interesting conversation to continue this. Thank you to all of our panelists. We will contact you to maybe get some of the slides because a lot of the people have asked for them. And I'm afraid we have run 5 minutes over time, so we have to wrap this up. I'm really sorry. Okay.
So, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.